Marcus Chen had cleaned these floors for 17 years, invisible to the suits who rushed past him each morning. He knew their coffee preferences, their weekend stories whispered in hallways, their late-night confessions to empty offices. But when CEO Richard Blackstone called him dead weight at the quarterly meeting, something shifted. The janitor, who everyone overlooked, was about to remind them that the person who sees everything, who listens to everything, might just know more about their company than they ever imagined. Some truths can only be spoken by those who've been silent too long. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The coffee stain on the marble floor had been there since Tuesday. Marcus Chen noticed it the way he noticed everything: the torn corner of the quarterly report someone had dropped, the lipstick smudge on the water cooler, the way Rebecca from accounting always left her desk lamp on when she worked late on the Morrison account. He pushed his cart past the executive conference room, the wheels squeaking in their familiar rhythm. Through the glass walls, he could see them gathering for the quarterly all-hands meeting. Blackstone stood at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The CEO's suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months. Marcus had been cleaning these floors for 17 years, long enough to watch junior associates become senior partners, long enough to see 3 CEOs come and go before Blackstone arrived 2 years ago with his efficiency reports and cost-cutting measures, long enough to become part of the furniture. He sprayed the coffee stain and knelt down with his microfiber cloth. The cleaning solution smelled like artificial lemon and broken promises. Marcus. He looked up to find Janet from HR standing beside him, her heels clicking nervously against the marble. "They want you in the conference room." Marcus sat back on his heels. In 17 years, he'd never been asked to step inside that glass box. He'd cleaned it countless times, polished the table until it gleamed, emptied trash bins full of crumpled strategies and discarded dreams, but never as a participant. "Me?" "All staff meeting." Janet's smile looked painted on. Everyone means everyone. The conference room felt different from the inside. Smaller somehow, despite its cathedral ceiling and panoramic view of the city. Marcus wheeled his cart to the back corner and found a seat against the wall. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, competing with the low murmur of conversations. Rebecca caught his eye and offered a small wave. She was one of the few who actually saw him, who asked about his daughter's college applications, and remembered that he'd been fighting to get his wife's medical bills covered by insurance. Blackstone cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering on such short notice." His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "As you know, Q3 numbers came in below projections." Again. Marcus noticed the way people shifted in their seats, the way Tom from sales loosened his tie just slightly. "We're bleeding money," Blackstone continued, clicking through slides on the massive monitor. "Overhead is through the roof. Operating costs are unsustainable. Something has to change." The pie charts and bar graphs painted a picture Marcus had seen before, in the private conversations he'd overheard while emptying trash cans. The company was hemorrhaging cash, but not for the reasons Blackstone claimed. Marcus had heard the real numbers whispered in late-night phone calls, seen the real expenses hidden in folders marked confidential. "Which brings me to our restructuring initiative." Blackstone's eyes swept the room. "We need to eliminate redundancies, cut the fat, remove dead weight." His gaze landed on Marcus. "Take our custodial staff, for example." Blackstone gestured toward the back of the room. "We're paying for services that could easily be contracted out at a fraction of the cost. Why are we carrying dead weight like this when we could be investing in growth?" The words hit Marcus like ice water. Dead weight. In 17 years of showing up before dawn and staying past midnight, of keeping their secrets and maintaining their spaces, of being the invisible foundation that held their pristine world together, he was dead weight. Around the room, eyes averted. Rebecca stared at her hands. Tom studied his phone. Even Janet, who'd asked him to be here, found something fascinating about the ceiling tiles. "Outsourcing custodial services could save us 40% annually," Blackstone continued, his voice gaining momentum. That's real money we could put toward marketing, toward R&D, toward positions that actually add value to this company. Marcus felt his hands clench in his lap. He thought about his daughter, Sophia, who would start at state in the fall if he could scrape together the tuition. About his wife Elena, whose treatments weren't covered because experimental was just another word for expensive. About the 17 years of overtime and holiday shifts and walking through their hallways like a ghost. Sometimes tough decisions are necessary, Blackstone said, advancing to the next slide. Sometimes we have to be willing to cut ties with employees who simply don't contribute to our bottom line. The PowerPoint slide showed a photo of Marcus from the company directory. His ID badge picture, taken 7 years ago when the system was updated. He remembered that day Elena had been having a good week, and Sophia had just made honor roll. He'd been smiling. Questions? Blackstone asked the room. Marcus stood up. The action was so unexpected, so unprecedented, that a hush fell over the conference room. Blackstone's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he'd just noticed a piece of furniture had moved. Yes? Blackstone's tone carried the polite irritation of someone addressing an interruption. Marcus walked slowly toward the front of the room. His work boots were quiet against the carpet, but each step felt amplified in the silence. He could feel every eye tracking his movement, could sense the tension radiating from the assembled staff. When he reached the front, he turned to face the room. 43 people. He knew all their names, their habits, their secrets, whispered in hallways and confessed to empty offices. He knew which marriages were failing and which promotions were being planned in back rooms. He knew about Rebecca's affair with the marketing director, about Tom's gambling problem, about Janet's drinking. He knew about Blackstone's offshore accounts. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said quietly. His voice carried despite its softness. "I've been cleaning these floors for 17 years. Blackstone's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus, this really isn't the appropriate forum for—" "You said I don't add value." Marcus's eyes never left Blackstone's face. "You called me dead weight." The CEO's expression shifted, calculating. Marcus could see him weighing options, wondering how far this would go. "I didn't mean anything personal. I know about Cayman National Bank." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Blackstone went very still. "I know about the consulting fees paid to Blackstone Holdings. I know about the contracts with your brother-in-law's construction company for work that was never done. I know about the marketing budget that goes to companies that exist only on paper." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, worn from years of carrying. The pages were filled with his careful handwriting, dates and amounts, and overheard conversations. 17 years of being invisible, Marcus continued. 17 years of listening to phone calls you thought no one could hear. 17 years of emptying trash cans full of documents you thought no one would read. Blackstone's face had gone pale. Around the room, people leaned forward in their seats, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "The company isn't failing because of dead weight," Marcus said. "It's failing because of theft." He opened the notebook and began to read. August 15, 2024. Conference call with Morrison Industries. Quote, "The beauty of shell companies is they're completely legal as long as you maintain the paperwork." September 3, 2024. Phone conversation with your accountant. Quote, "The Cayman account is clean. There's no way to trace the transfers back to the company." Blackstone stepped toward him. "That's enough." But Marcus continued reading. October 7, 2024. Meeting with legal counsel. Quote, "If anyone starts asking questions about the renovation contracts, we blame it on poor oversight. Plausible deniability." "Security," Blackstone barked. The security guards at the back of the room didn't move. Marcus had been bringing them coffee for 3 years, had listened to their complaints about inadequate pay and non-existent benefits. They watched with interest as the invisible man finally became visible. "The company is bleeding money," Marcus said, closing the notebook, "but not because of custodial salaries, because someone's been bleeding it dry from the inside." He looked around the room at the faces staring back at him, some shocked, some calculating, some beginning to show a dawning understanding. "I clean up messes," Marcus said simply. "It's what I do. I clean up spilled coffee and scattered papers and broken glass. But some messes are too big for one person." He turned back to Blackstone, who stood frozen at the front of the room. "You want to talk about dead weight? About people who don't add value?" Marcus's voice remained steady, quiet. "Look in the mirror." The silence that followed felt alive, charged with electricity and possibility. Marcus could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below, the barely audible whisper of people breathing. Rebecca was the first to speak. "Is that why the Morrison account was terminated?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. "Because they started asking about the consulting fees?" Marcus nodded. "They wanted documentation, receipts, proof of services rendered." Tom leaned forward. "What about the R&D budget that disappeared last quarter?" "Transferred to Blackstone Holdings," Marcus replied. "Invoiced as strategic consulting. No deliverables, no reports. Just money moving from one account to another." Blackstone found his voice. "These are serious accusations." "They're not accusations," Marcus interrupted. "They're facts. Documented facts. With witnesses." He gestured toward the security camera in the corner of the room, its red light blinking steadily. "Every conversation in this building is recorded. Every phone call logged. You taught me that, Mr. Blackstone. During your security briefing 2 years ago, you said transparency was essential for accountability." The CEO's hands were shaking now, almost imperceptibly. But Marcus noticed. He'd spent 17 years noticing the small things. "The question," Marcus continued, "is what happens next." He looked around the room at the faces of his co-workers, people who'd walked past him for years without seeing him, people who were suddenly understanding that the invisible man had been the most valuable employee in the building. "I have copies," he said quietly, "of everything, stored safely. Multiple locations." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Blackstone straightened his tie, trying to reclaim some authority. "Even if these allegations had merit, which they don't, you've just committed career suicide. You'll never work in this industry again." Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the conference room. "Mr. Blackstone," he said, "I've been dead to this industry for 17 years. Dead weight, remember? The only difference is now I'm dead weight with documentation." He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Oh, and for the record, outsourcing custodial services would save you 40% annually. But keeping someone around who actually pays attention? That's priceless." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving 43 people and one very quiet conference room in his wake. Marcus returned to his cart in the hallway. The coffee stain was gone, wiped clean. He'd done his job. Now it was time to let others do theirs. The security footage disappeared first. Marcus discovered this 3 days later while emptying the trash in the IT department. Kevin Morrisono, relation to the construction company, was hunched over his computer at 11 p.m., muttering curses that would have made his grandmother reach for soap. "Problem?" Marcus asked, setting down the recycling bin. Kevin jumped, then relaxed when he saw the familiar uniform. "Jesus, Marcus! You move like a ghost." 17 years of practice," Marcus resumed, emptying the wastebaskets. "What's got you here so late?" Someone wiped the server. 3 days of security footage, gone. Just. Kevin snapped his fingers. Vanished. Marcus paused in his work. "That's unfortunate. Tell me about it." "Blackstone's breathing down my neck, wants to know how someone could access the system without leaving a trace. Like I'm supposed to be psychic or something." Kevin turned back to his monitor, lines of code reflecting in his thick glasses. "You know what's weird, though? The deletion happened from inside the building. Someone with administrative access. Inside job? Has to be. But get this, the logs show the deletion happened during the quarterly meeting. While everyone was in that conference room, Marcus tied off the trash bag with deliberate care. Everyone? Well, almost everyone. Few people had laptop access. Could have done it remotely if they knew what they were doing. Kevin pulled up a list of active users. Blackstone, his assistant Sarah, couple of the senior partners. The list glowed on the screen, timestamps marking digital breadcrumbs. Marcus memorized the names, the way he memorized everything. Anyway, Kevin continued, whoever did it was smart, covered their tracks pretty well, but not well enough. Meaning? Kevin grinned, the expression of someone who'd found a puzzle piece everyone else had missed. Backup servers. We keep rolling copies of everything, stored off-site. Company policy. Blackstone insisted on it when he started, said we needed redundancy for legal compliance. Marcus smiled. Sometimes irony was the universe's way of keeping score. Of course, accessing those backups requires board approval, Kevin added. Chain of custody protocols, all that legal stuff. Could take weeks to get authorization. Unless someone had a very good reason to expedite the process. Kevin looked up from his screen. In the fluorescent glow, his face seemed younger, more curious. Marcus, you've been here longer than anyone. You ever notice anything odd about Blackstone? The question hung between them like incense, heavy with implication. Marcus considered his response carefully. I notice a lot of things, Kevin. Part of the job. Right. Of course. Kevin turned back to his computer. Just wondering if you'd ever seen anything that might explain why someone would want to delete security footage. Marcus lifted the full trash bag and placed it on his cart. Have you talked to Rebecca lately? Rebecca from accounting? No, why? She's been working late on the Morrison account. Might have some insights about security protocols. Kevin's fingers slowed on the keyboard. The Morrison account that got terminated? The very one. They looked at each other across the cluttered desk, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. Kevin saved his work and reached for his jacket. You know what? I think I'll go find Rebecca. Compare notes about security protocols. Good idea. Marcus pushed his cart toward the door. Oh, and Kevin? Those backup servers you mentioned? Might want to mention them to someone who could authorize access. Just in case. In case of what? Marcus paused in the doorway. In case the truth matters to anyone around here. Rebecca was still at her desk when Kevin found her, surrounded by spreadsheets and empty coffee cups. The accounting department felt like a morgue after hours, filled with the ghosts of numbers that didn't add up. Working late again? Kevin asked, pulling up a chair. She looked up, startled. God, you scared me. What are you doing here? Security footage got wiped. Trying to figure out how and why. Rebecca's pen stopped moving. Wiped? 3 days' worth. Right around the time of that quarterly meeting. Kevin leaned forward. Marcus thought you might have some insights. Marcus? Rebecca glanced toward the hallway where Marcus had disappeared with his cart. What does he have to do with anything? Kevin lowered his voice. He's been asking questions. About Blackstone. About company finances. About why someone would want to erase evidence. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the numbers on her screen. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The Morrison account wasn't terminated because of poor performance. No? They were asking for documentation. Invoices, receipts, proof of services, normal audit stuff. She pulled up a file on her computer. But when I started pulling the records together, I found discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Rebecca's fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through the data. Payments to companies that don't exist. Consulting fees with no documentation. Renovations that were never completed but fully paid for. Kevin felt something cold settle in his stomach. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? 7 figures. Over 2 years. Rebecca turned her screen so he could see the spreadsheet. But here's the thing, I wasn't supposed to find this. The files were buried in subdirectories, encrypted, hidden behind fake project codes. So how did you find them? Rebecca smiled grimly. Someone left a trail. Breadcrumbs in the filing system. Almost like they wanted the information to be discovered, but only by someone who knew where to look. Kevin studied the screen, watching numbers that painted a picture of systematic theft. Who would have access to create these hidden files? Anyone with administrative privileges. But the pattern suggests someone with deep knowledge of our accounting software, our filing systems, our audit procedures. Blackstone, or someone working with him. Rebecca saved the file and copied it to a flash drive. Kevin, if this gets out, Blackstone won't just lose his job. He'll go to prison. Which explains the deleted security footage. Except someone was recording everything. Rebecca held up the flash drive. Someone who knew exactly what to look for and where to find it. Kevin thought about Marcus. About 17 years of invisible presence. About a man who cleaned up messes but had never been considered important enough to worry about. We need to talk to the board. The board that approved Blackstone's hiring? The board that signed off on the consulting contracts? Rebecca shook her head. Half of them probably know what's happening. Then who? Before Rebecca could answer, the lights in the accounting department flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Power outage? Kevin whispered, "No." Rebecca was already shutting down her computer, pocketing the flash drive. Someone's trying to wipe the servers. Physically. They could hear footsteps in the hallway, moving with purpose toward the IT department. Kevin grabbed Rebecca's hand. Back exit, now. They slipped through the maze of cubicles, navigating by the crimson emergency lighting. Behind them, they could hear voices, instructions being given in hushed tones. The back stairwell was dark and echoing. Rebecca pulled out her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the concrete steps. "Where are we going?" "Parking garage," Kevin replied. "Then somewhere safe to figure out our next move." They descended in silence, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. When they reached the garage level, Kevin pushed open the heavy door and peered into the dimly lit space. Marcus was waiting by Rebecca's car. "You're late," he said quietly. "I was starting to worry." Rebecca nearly dropped her phone. "How did you—" 17 years, Marcus replied. "You learned to anticipate things." Kevin looked between them, understanding, dawning. "You orchestrated this. The breadcrumbs Rebecca found, the timing of everything." Marcus nodded. "Sometimes the truth needs help finding its way to the surface." "Why now?" Rebecca asked. "After all these years, why now?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring at the concrete ceiling. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of accumulated grievances. "My daughter starts college in the fall. My wife needs treatment that insurance won't cover. 17 years of watching this company bleed money while employees get called dead weight." He shrugged. "Sometimes you reach a breaking point." "And the security footage?" Kevin's right, it was wiped remotely during the meeting. But Blackstone made one mistake. Marcus smiled. He forgot about the backup systems. And he definitely forgot about the janitor who has keys to every room in the building. Rebecca held up the flash drive. "I have the financial records. And I have 17 years of documented conversations, recorded meetings, and photocopied documents." Marcus patted his jacket pocket. Everything Blackstone thought was private. Kevin pulled out his laptop. "And I can access those backup servers from anywhere with internet connection." They stood in the red-tinged silence of the parking garage. Three unlikely conspirators, united by a shared understanding that sometimes justice required breaking a few rules. "So what's the plan?" Rebecca asked. Marcus checked his watch. "Board meetings tomorrow at 9 a.m., emergency session, called by Blackstone to discuss the security breach." "He's going to blame it on hackers," Kevin said. "Outside actors trying to steal company secrets." "Probably." Marcus opened the door to Rebecca's car. "Unless someone presents evidence to the contrary." Rebecca slid into the driver's seat. "Evidence that implicates half the board." "Which is why we're not going to the board," Marcus replied. "We're going to someone who has nothing to lose and everything to gain from seeing Blackstone exposed." "Who?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "The Morrison Industries CEO. The one whose contract was terminated to cover up the theft." He closed the car door and leaned down to the window. "Turns out, James Morrison doesn't like being used as a scapegoat. Rebecca started the engine. And he'll listen to us? He'll listen to evidence, especially when it proves his company was cut loose to hide someone else's crimes. Kevin closed his laptop. When do we meet him? We don't, Marcus replied. I do. Tonight. You two have something more important to handle. Which is? Marcus walked toward his own car, a 15-year-old Honda that had seen better decades. Making sure that backup server data gets copied before tomorrow's meeting, multiple copies. Multiple locations. He paused with his hand on the car door. And Rebecca? That flash drive you're carrying? Might want to make a few copies of that too, just in case. The parking garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of ventilation systems and the sound of 3 engines starting up. By morning, everything would change. But tonight, they still had work to do. Marcus drove through the empty streets toward a meeting that would either vindicate 17 years of invisible service or destroy what little security he had left. In his rearview mirror, the office building disappeared into the darkness, its windows dark, except for a few scattered lights on the upper floors. Someone was still working late. Someone was still trying to cover their tracks. But Marcus had learned long ago that the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you tried to bury it. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was the invisible people who held the most powerful truths of all. James Morrison looked exactly like someone who'd built a construction empire from nothing, calloused hands, sharp eyes, and the kind of stillness that came from learning to listen before speaking. His office smelled like coffee and sawdust, walls lined with photos of buildings that bore his company's signature. Marcus sat across from him at 11 p.m., a manila folder resting on the desk between them like a peace offering. You said you had information about why my contract was terminated, Morrison said, pouring coffee from a thermos. I'll be honest, Mr. Chenwin, a janitor calls at 10:30 at night claiming he can prove fraud. My first instinct is to hang up. But you didn't. Morrison smiled grimly. No, because Richard Blackstone cost me $3 million and my company's reputation. If there's even a chance you can prove he's dirty, I'll listen to the devil himself. Marcus opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of invoices, payment authorizations, and email printouts. 17 years of carefully collected evidence, organized with the methodical precision of someone who understood that details mattered. Your contract was terminated because you started asking for documentation, Marcus said. Proof that the consulting fees you were paying to Blackstone Holdings were legitimate. Morrison leaned forward, studying the papers. Blackstone Holdings. That's his personal company? Shell company. Exists only on paper. No employees, no office, no services rendered. Marcus pointed to a series of invoices. But over 2 years, your company paid them $400,000 for strategic consulting and project oversight. Son of a bitch, Morrison's voice was quiet, but his knuckles were white around his coffee cup. And when I started asking questions, he terminated your contract and blamed it on poor performance. Made you the scapegoat to cover his tracks. Morrison flipped through the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. How long has this been going on? Since he took over as CEO. Maybe longer. Marcus pulled out his notebook. But Morrison Industries wasn't his only target, 17 different vendors over 2 years. Same pattern, shell companies, fake consulting fees, contracts terminated when people asked too many questions. Jesus. Morrison sat back in his chair. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $8.7 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. Morrison stared at the ceiling, calculating losses and damaged relationships and the ripple effects of systematic fraud. Why come to me? He asked finally. Why not the police, the FBI, the board? Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because tomorrow morning, Blackstone's going to blame everything on hackers, external threats, maybe even suggest that vendors like you were somehow complicit. Throwing me under the bus again. Making you the villain instead of the victim. Marcus leaned forward. But if someone who was directly harmed by his actions were to present evidence at the board meeting, Morrison's eyes sharpened. Someone like a construction company CEO who lost millions due to fraudulent contract termination. Someone who has nothing to lose and everything to gain from seeing justice done. Morrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the construction yard. Heavy machinery sat silent in the darkness, waiting for morning and the work that would begin again. "What do you get out of this, Mr. Chen? After 17 years of silence, why speak up now?" Marcus thought about Elena, sleeping fitfully at home while pain medication fought a losing battle against cancer. About Sophia, whose acceptance letter to State University still sat on their kitchen table next to bills they couldn't pay. About 17 years of being invisible while watching thieves in expensive suits call honest workers dead weight. "I get to go home and tell my wife that sometimes the good guys win," he said simply. Morrison turned from the window. "What do you need from me? Show up at the board meeting, present the evidence. Let them know that Morrison Industries intends to pursue full legal action against Blackstone and anyone who enabled his fraud. And you'll back up my claims?" Marcus nodded. With 17 years of documentation. Morrison returned to his desk and began copying the documents with his phone camera. "This evidence, how did you collect it without anyone noticing?" "Invisible people see everything," Marcus replied. "Hear everything, clean up everything. After a while, you become part of the background, and people forget you exist. But you were documenting it all. My father was a bookkeeper. Taught me that numbers don't lie, but people do. Said if you want to catch a liar, follow the money." Marcus closed the folder. "Took 17 years, but I followed it." Morrison finished photographing the documents and handed the originals back. "Mr. Chen, if this goes the way I think it will, you're going to need protection. Blackstone won't go down quietly. I know. You could disappear. Take your family and start over somewhere else. I have connections, could help with relocation, new identities if necessary." Marcus considered the offer. It was tempting, the chance to escape the building that had defined his adult life. To start fresh somewhere, Elena could get treatment and Sophia could go to college without drowning in debt. But running felt like admitting he'd been wrong to stay silent for so long. "Thank you," he said finally, "but I've been running from this moment for 17 years. Time to stand still and see what happens." Morrison nodded with the respect of one working man for another. "Board meeting's at 9 a.m. I'll be there." "One more thing," Marcus said, standing to leave. "Blackstone's not working alone. He's got help from inside, someone with access to security systems, financial records, legal documentation." "Any idea who?" Marcus paused at the door. "Not yet. But whoever it is will panic when you present that evidence tomorrow. Watch for the tells who looks surprised, who doesn't, who's more interested in damage control than justice." "You sound like you've done this before." Marcus smiled. "No, but I've been preparing for it my whole life." The drive home took Marcus through the industrial district where he'd grown up, past the factory where his father had worked for 30 years before automation made him obsolete. The old man had died 2 years after retirement, worn out from a lifetime of making other people's dreams profitable. Elena was awake when he came through the front door, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. "How'd it go?" she asked, not looking up from the screen. "Morrison's in. He'll present the evidence at the board meeting." Elena saved her work and closed the laptop. She was researching clinical trials, experimental treatments, anything that might buy them more time together. The kitchen table was covered with medical journals and insurance forms, a paper trail of hope and bureaucracy. "Are you sure about this, Marcus? Once you do this, there's no going back." He sat down across from her, taking her hands in his. Even with the cancer, even with the pain, she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Elena, I've been invisible for 17 years. Watching thieves get rich while honest people struggle. Watching them call us dead weight while they steal millions." He squeezed her hands gently. "I can't do it anymore. But Sophia's college, my treatments if you lose your job. If I don't do this, I lose myself." Marcus looked around the kitchen. At the photos of Sophia's graduation, the medical bills stacked neatly by the window, the acceptance letter from State University held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a mortarboard. Maybe it's time to bet on something besides fear. Elena studied his face in the soft light. You've made up your mind. I made it up 17 years ago. I just wasn't ready to act on it. She nodded slowly. Then we do this together. Elena. No arguments. You've been carrying this alone for too long. She opened her laptop again. I've been researching Blackstone Holdings, cross-referencing shell companies and financial records. Want to see what I found? Marcus leaned forward as she pulled up a spreadsheet that made Rebecca's work look elementary. Blackstone's not just stealing from your company, Elena said. He's got shell companies connected to 3 other corporations where he served as interim CEO over the past 5 years. Same pattern every time: consulting fees, renovation contracts, terminated vendors who ask too many questions. How much? Total? Conservative estimate across all 4 companies? Elena's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up bank records and corporate filings. $47 million. Marcus stared at the screen. Jesus, it gets worse. Those clinical trials I've been researching? The experimental treatments? Elena pulled up another window. Blackstone's wife died of cancer 3 years ago. Her treatment was paid for by a medical foundation that doesn't exist, another shell company funded by stolen money. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stole money to save his wife. And when she died anyway, he kept stealing. Old habits die hard, I guess. Marcus thought about Morrison, about Rebecca and Kevin, about all the people whose lives had been damaged by one man's grief turned toxic. Elena, if this comes out, if the FBI gets involved, then maybe $47 million goes back to the people it was stolen from. Maybe your company survives. Maybe other people don't have to choose between their principles and their paychecks. She closed the laptop and reached for his hands again. Marcus, you've spent 17 years cleaning up other people's messes. Tomorrow you get to clean up your own. They sat in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of a life lived, carefully bills paid on time, dreams deferred but not abandoned, love that had survived cancer and poverty, and the slow erosion of hope. What if it doesn't work? Marcus asked. What if Blackstone finds a way to blame us, discredit the evidence? Elena smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young woman he'd married 25 years ago. Then at least Sophia will know her father fought for something bigger than himself. Upstairs, they could hear Sophia moving around her room, probably studying for finals or working on college applications or doing any of the 1,000 things that occupied the mind of an 18-year-old preparing to remake the world. She doesn't know, Marcus said. About tomorrow, no, but she knows you're a good man who works hard and takes care of his family. Whatever happens tomorrow won't change that. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of 17 years lifting slightly from his shoulders. Tomorrow he would sit in a conference room and watch powerful people squirm as their carefully constructed lies crumbled. Tomorrow he would stop being invisible. But tonight he was exactly where he belonged, in a kitchen with the woman he loved, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived with quiet dignity, preparing to remind the world that sometimes the most important truths are held by the people everyone forgets to see. Outside, the city hummed with the sounds of late-night workers and early-morning dreamers, people who understood that the real work of the world happened when the executives went home and the invisible people took over. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, Marcus Chen was still just a janitor who knew how to clean up messes. The board meeting was supposed to start at 9 a.m. By 8:45, the conference room looked like a war zone preparing for battle. Marcus arrived early, wheeling his cart through the hallways with the same quiet efficiency he'd maintained for 17 years. But this morning felt different. The building hummed with nervous energy, hushed conversations that stopped when he passed, eyes that tracked his movement with new awareness. Word had gotten out. Rebecca nodded to him from her desk, her computer screen displaying spreadsheets that told stories of missing money and fabricated companies. Kevin was already in the IT department, backup servers humming as they prepared to deliver evidence that someone had tried very hard to erase. And in the parking garage, James Morrison sat in his truck, reviewing documents that would either vindicate his company or destroy what was left of his reputation. The conference room filled slowly. Board members arrived in expensive cars, their faces carrying the careful neutrality of people who'd learned to navigate corporate politics by showing nothing. Margaret Winters, the board chair, took her seat at the head of the table opposite Blackstone's usual position. David Park, the CFO who'd signed off on the fraudulent contracts. Sarah Martinez from legal, who'd helped structure the shell companies. Tom Bradford, whose family had founded the company 3 generations ago. Blackstone entered at exactly 9 a.m., his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit immaculate. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed his secrets were still safe. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this emergency session," he began, his voice carrying its usual authority. "As you know, we've experienced a serious security breach. Hackers attempted to access our financial systems and delete critical data." Marcus continued emptying trash cans, invisible as always, listening as Blackstone spun a story that painted external threats as the villain and positioned himself as the protector of company assets. "Our IT department has confirmed that the attack originated from outside sources, likely corporate espionage aimed at stealing proprietary information. We've contacted the FBI and implemented enhanced security protocols." Margaret Winters leaned forward. "Richard, before we discuss security measures, I believe we have a guest this morning, Mr. Morrison from Morrison Industries?" Blackstone's composure flickered for just a momenta, brief tightening around his eyes that Marcus caught from across the room. "I'm not sure why." The conference room door opened, and James Morrison walked in carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd been wronged and was ready to set the record straight. "Morning, folks," Morrison said, taking a seat at the table without invitation. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I have some information that might interest you." Blackstone's jaw clenched. "Jim, I'm not sure this is the appropriate forum." "Oh, I think it's perfect," Morrison interrupted, opening his briefcase. "See, I've been wondering why my company's contract was terminated so abruptly, especially after we'd maintained an excellent working relationship for 5 years. He placed a stack of documents on the table. "Turns out, someone's been using my company to launder money. Fake consulting fees, non-existent services, shell companies designed to funnel cash out of this organization." Morrison's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with controlled fury. $400,000 over 2 years, money that was supposed to go toward legitimate construction projects. Margaret Winters picked up one of the documents. "These are invoices to Blackstone Holdings. A company that exists only on paper," Morrison continued. "No employees, no office, no services rendered. Just a bank account that happens to belong to your CEO." Blackstone stood abruptly. "These are serious allegations." "They're facts," Morrison said. "Documented facts." With supporting evidence from someone who's been watching this fraud unfold for years, all eyes turned to Marcus, who was now standing at the back of the room, his cart forgotten, his notebook open in his hands. 17 years, Marcus said quietly. 17 years of listening to conversations you thought no one could hear, of collecting documents you thought no one would read, of watching honest people get called dead weight while thieves got rich." David Park leaned forward. "Marcus, what exactly are you alleging?" Marcus walked to the front of the room, his work boots silent on the carpet. He placed his notebook on the table next to Morrison's documents. "I'm alleging that Richard Blackstone has been systematically stealing from this company since the day he was hired. Shell companies, fake consulting fees, non-existent renovation projects. $8.7 million over 2 years. Sarah Martinez from legal was reading through Morrison's documents, her face growing pale. "These invoices, I remember approving some of these contracts." "Because you were told they were legitimate consulting fees," Marcus replied. "Strategic planning, project oversight, financial analysis. Services that were never rendered by companies that don't exist." Margaret Winters looked at Blackstone, who had gone very still. "Richard, how do you respond to these allegations?" Blackstone straightened his tie, trying to reclaim control. "Margaret, these are desperate accusations from disgruntled employees and terminated vendors. Mr. Chen is facing termination, and Mr. Morrison is angry about losing a contract. This is nothing more than bullshit." The word came from Rebecca, who had entered the conference room carrying a laptop and wearing the expression of someone who'd had enough of lies. "Sorry for the language," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I've spent the last 3 days following the money trail, and it leads directly to Richard Blackstone." She opened her laptop and projected a spreadsheet onto the room's main screen. Numbers filled the display: transfers, invoices, payments that painted a picture of systematic theft. 17 shell companies over 2 years, Rebecca continued. All receiving payments for services never rendered, all connected to bank accounts controlled by Richard Blackstone or his associates. Tom Bradford studied the screen. "Rebecca, how did you access this information?" "Because someone left breadcrumbs," she replied, glancing at Marcus. "Someone who wanted the truth to be found but needed it to be discovered by the right person at the right time." Kevin appeared in the doorway, carrying a tablet displaying security footage. "And I have video evidence," he announced. "Backup servers that Mr. Blackstone forgot existed. 17 hours of him in his office after hours, shredding documents, deleting files, making phone calls to offshore accounts." The tablet screen showed grainy footage of Blackstone working alone in his office, feeding papers into a shredder, his movements quick and furtive. Margaret Winters stood slowly. "Richard, I think you need to sit down." But Blackstone was already moving toward the door, his careful composure finally cracking. "This is a setup, a conspiracy by people who want to destroy this company." "No," Marcus said quietly. "It's justice by people who want to save it." Blackstone stopped at the door and turned back, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "You think you've won something?" he snarled at Marcus. "You're a janitor, a nobody. Even if any of this sticks, you'll be back to cleaning toilets and emptying trash cans. That's all you'll ever be." The room fell silent. Marcus looked at Blackstone, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful CEO, but a frightened man who'd built his identity on other people's money and was watching it all crumble. "You're right," Marcus said finally. "I am a janitor. I clean up messes. And Richard, you're the biggest mess I've ever had to deal with." He walked toward Blackstone, stopping just a few feet away. "But here's the difference between us. When I go home tonight, I can look my family in the eye. When I clean these floors tomorrow, I'll know they're clean. When people walk past me in the hallway, they'll know exactly who I am and what I stand for." Marcus paused, letting the words settle. "Can you say the same?" Blackstone's face went white. Without another word, he pushed through the door and disappeared into the hallway. The conference room erupted in voices: questions, accusations, demands for explanations. Margaret Winters called for order, but the damage was done. The carefully maintained facade of corporate respectability had cracked wide open, revealing the rot underneath. Morrison stood and gathered his documents. "I'll be filing criminal charges this afternoon, and a civil suit to recover damages." "Mr. Morrison," Margaret said, "the board will fully cooperate with any investigation." "I hope so," Morrison replied, "because this goes deeper than one CEO. Someone helped him. Someone approved these contracts, structured these shell companies, covered up the evidence." His eyes swept the room, landing on each board member in turn. "And until we know who, nobody should consider themselves safe." As the board members filed out, arguing among themselves and already planning damage control strategies, Marcus found himself alone in the conference room with his cart and his notebook. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "Marcus, you okay?" He looked around the room at the table where he'd been called dead weight, at the windows overlooking a city that never stopped moving, at the space where he'd finally stopped being invisible. "Yeah," he said, returning his notebook to his pocket. "I think I am." Kevin joined them, still carrying his tablet. "So what happens now?" Marcus began collecting the coffee cups and water glasses left behind by people too shocked to clean up after themselves. "Now we go back to work," he said simply. "The floors still need mopping, the trash still needs emptying, the building still needs taking care of." "But you're a hero," Rebecca protested. "You brought down a corrupt CEO, exposed massive fraud." "I did my job," Marcus interrupted gently. "I cleaned up a mess. That's what janitors do." He pushed his cart toward the door, then stopped and looked back at them. "But maybe now, when people see me in the hallway, they'll remember that sometimes the most important work happens when nobody's watching. And sometimes the people everyone forgets to see are the ones who see everything." As he walked through the building, Marcus noticed something different. People made eye contact. They nodded. They said good morning. He was still invisible, but in a new way invisible, like gravity, like the foundation that holds everything else up, and for the first time in 17 years, that felt exactly right. 3 months later, Marcus was still mopping floors at 6 a.m. The building felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of accumulated lies had been lifted from its foundation. The FBI investigation had wrapped up the week before, with Blackstone pleading guilty to 17 counts of fraud and money laundering. Sarah Martinez from legal had been indicted as a co-conspirator. 2 board members had resigned in disgrace. But the floors still needed mopping. Marcus pushed his cart through the executive level, past the corner office that had stood empty since Blackstone's arrest. Margaret Winters had taken over as interim CEO, and her first act had been to offer Marcus a position in corporate security. "Someone who sees everything," she'd said, "should be watching for everyone." He'd politely declined. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Sophia stepped out, carrying a visitor's badge and wearing her best interview outfit. She was scheduled to meet with the company's new scholarship committee, a program funded by the recovered stolen money that would send 20 employees' children to college each year. "Morning, Dad," she said, straightening his collar the way she'd done since she was 8 years old. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means something important is about to happen." Marcus smiled. "You'll do fine. Just remember, be yourself, because yourself is pretty amazing," Sophia finished. "I know, Dad. You've only told me that 1,000 times." She headed toward the conference room where the scholarship committee waited. Marcus watched her go, marveling at the confidence in her stride, the way she carried herself like someone who belonged in any room she entered. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Test results came back. "Dr. Martinez wants to see us this afternoon. Good news, I think." The experimental treatment had been working, slowly, carefully, buying them time and hope in equal measure. The clinical trial was fully funded, new one of several medical research programs established with the recovered money. Marcus resumed mopping, working his way toward the accounting department, where Rebecca was already at her desk despite the early hour. She'd been promoted to chief financial officer after the investigation, tasked with rebuilding the company's financial controls and ensuring that what happened with Blackstone could never happen again. "Morning, Marcus," she called out. "Coffee's fresh, if you want some." He accepted the cup gratefully. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had evolved from cordial coworker interactions to something approaching friendship. Rebecca had become the keeper of the company's financial conscience, and Marcus had become its unofficial guardian of truth. "How's the audit coming?" he asked. "Almost finished. We recovered $8.2 million more than anyone thought possible." Rebecca pulled up a spreadsheet on her screen. Morrison Industries got their money back, plus damages. The pension fund was restored, the employee medical insurance was expanded, and the people who were laid off during Blackstone's cost-cutting all offered their jobs back, with back pay. Rebecca sipped her coffee. Turns out the company wasn't broke after all. Just being robbed. Marcus nodded, feeling a satisfaction that went deeper than vindication. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration, about making things right for people who'd suffered while thieves prospered. Kevin appeared around the corner, still carrying his perpetual laptop, but now sporting a security director's badge. "Marcus, got a minute?" Kevin asked. New employee orientation is starting, and Margaret thought you might want to say something. Marcus considered this. Speaking to new employees, sharing his story as a cautionary tale and an inspiration had become an unexpected part of his routine. Margaret insisted that every person who worked for the company should understand that ethical behavior mattered more than quarterly profits. "What's the group like?" Marcus asked. 12 new hires, accounting, IT, facilities management, young mostly, just starting their careers. "Good," Marcus said. "They need to hear it from the beginning." The three of them walked toward the training room, passing through hallways that Marcus knew better than his own home. Every corner held a memory now not just of cleaning and maintenance, but of the slow accumulation of evidence that had brought down a criminal conspiracy. The new employees looked exactly like Marcus had expected, eager, nervous, dressed in their best clothes and trying to make good impressions. They ranged in age from early 20s to late 30s, representing a cross-section of backgrounds and experiences. Margaret Winters stood at the front of the room, looking more relaxed than Marcus had seen her since taking over as CEO. "Before we begin today's orientation," Margaret said, "I'd like you to meet someone. Marcus Chen has been with our company for 17 years. He's seen this organization at its best and its worst, and he has some wisdom to share about what it means to work with integrity." Marcus walked to the front of the room, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves that came with public speaking. But these weren't board members or executives. These were working people, people who understood what it meant to show up every day and do honest work. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a janitor." A few people smiled. Unsure whether this was some kind of corporate team-building exercise. "I clean floors and empty trash cans and maintain the building you'll be working in. I've been doing this job for 17 years, and I want to tell you something important about the work you're about to begin." Marcus looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "Your job, whatever it is, matters. Not just because you're getting paid to do it, but because how you do it says something about who you are. Whether you're processing invoices, or writing code, or answering phones, you're part of something bigger than yourself." He paused, thinking about Blackstone, about the temptation to cut corners and rationalize compromises. "You're going to see things that don't seem right, numbers that don't add up, policies that don't make sense, people who treat others badly because they think they can get away with it." Marcus's voice grew stronger. "When that happens, you have a choice. You can look the other way, tell yourself it's not your problem, focus on keeping your head down and your paycheck coming." The room was completely silent now. "Or you can remember that being invisible doesn't mean being powerless. That sometimes the most important work happens when nobody's watching. That the people who clean up messes, literal and figurative, are the foundation that holds everything else up." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Chen, what if speaking up means losing your job? What if you have family to support?" Marcus smiled. "That's the hardest question there is, and I can't answer it for you. But I can tell you this, I spent 17 years being afraid to speak up, and it almost cost me everything that mattered. When I finally found the courage to do what was right, I discovered that I wasn't alone. That there were other people who cared about truth and justice and doing good work." He gestured toward Rebecca and Kevin. "The people who helped expose the fraud in this company, they weren't executives or board members. They were working people like you, people who decided that their integrity mattered more than their fear." Margaret stepped forward. "Which is why this company has implemented new policies, whistleblower protections, anonymous reporting systems, regular ethics training. We want people to speak up when they see problems." Marcus nodded. "But policies are just words on paper. What matters is culture, how people treat each other every day. Whether you help your coworkers or compete with them, whether you tell the truth or just tell people what they want to hear." He looked around the room one more time. "You're starting your careers at a company that learned the hard way that shortcuts and compromises and looking the other way don't work. That the only sustainable way to build something worthwhile is with honesty and hard work and people who care about more than just themselves." Marcus walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and one more thing. If you ever see me in the hallway, say hello. I may be pushing a mop cart, but I'm paying attention. We all are. That's how we make sure this place stays clean. As he left the orientation room and returned to his cart, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done. Not just the floor mopping and trash emptying, but the harder work of building something worth preserving. His phone buzzed with another text from Elena. Sophia's interview went great. Scholarship committee was impressed. I think our girl's going to college. Marcus smiled, pushing his cart toward the elevator. Sophia would study business and ethics, she'd announced after the Blackstone scandal broke. She wanted to understand how organizations worked, how to build them better, how to prevent the kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed her father's company. The elevator carried him down to the lobby, where the morning rush was beginning. Employees streamed through the glass doors, coffee cups in hand, ready to start another day of work that mattered. Marcus began mopping the lobby floor, working around the foot traffic with practiced efficiency. Some people nodded as they passed, others stopped to say good morning. A few asked about Elena's health or Sophia's college plans. He was still invisible in many ways, still the man with the mop bucket, still part of the background that kept the building functioning. But now his invisibility came with recognition, with respect, with the understanding that sometimes the most important truths are held by the people everyone forgets to see. James Morrison walked through the lobby, heading to a meeting with the new management team. His company had been awarded the contract to renovate the building's HVAC system. Legitimate work, honestly bid, properly documented. "Morning, Marcus," Morrison said, stopping by the elevator. "Morning, Jim. How's business?" "Better than ever? Turns out, when you work with honest people, everything runs smoother." Morrison smiled. "Company's expanding. Hiring 20 new people this quarter. That's good to hear." The elevator arrived, and Morrison stepped inside. "Hey, Marcus, thank you for having the courage to do what was right. Thank you for listening when it mattered." As the elevator doors closed, Marcus returned to his mopping. The lobby floor gleamed under the morning light, clean and ready for whatever the day would bring. At lunchtime, he would drive home to meet Elena at the doctor's office, where they would learn that the experimental treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope. That evening they would celebrate Sophia's scholarship over dinner at the little Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date 26 years ago. But now, in the quiet moments between the morning rush and the lunch crowd, Marcus Chen continued the work he'd been doing for 17 years. He cleaned floors and emptied trash cans and maintained the building that housed hundreds of people pursuing their dreams and supporting their families and building something worthwhile together. It was honest work, invisible work, essential work. And for the first time in 17 years, Marcus understood that it was exactly where he belonged, not because he was powerless, but because he was the foundation that held everything else up. The floors gleamed under his careful attention, clean and ready for whatever came next, just the way they should be.